Today we have an Amazon journey with Mark Lewyn, a longtime Amazon seller who just wrote a book about his journey on Amazon. He's a serial entrepreneur, former journalist, and he jumped into the internet early. Looking forward to talking to Mark. This is the My Amazon Guy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Pope, founder of the agency My Amazon Guy. Tune in each week to learn how to grow your Amazon sales. All right, I'm now joined by Mark. Thanks for coming on the My Amazon Guy podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Mark, you've got a lot of Amazon selling experience. I'm super excited to talk to you about your book today as well. But before we do that, why don't we tell our listeners a little bit about how you first got started selling on Amazon?
Well, it's really been a pretty long journey to get here. So I'm going to do it kind of chronologically. So the first part of my career, I was a journalist. So I wrote about technology for Business Week and for USA Today. I did that for a long time. And then kind of when the internet came along, I thought, maybe journalism isn't quite the right thing now. And I should kind of get into the startup world. And I joined a company called City Search, which was one of the early internet companies, and did that for a few years and did a few other startups of my own over quite a period of time. And the most recent startup I had done, I had raised like a whole lot of money and like roughly $3 million. And it was basically a company that took error, remember those error pages you used to see all the time on the internet? Well, I was able to capture those and turn them into search results, and we would generate money from those search results. Anyway, that did really well, and then it crashed and burned.
And, sounds like a serial entrepreneur's problem, right?
Yeah, so it was great. I mean, it generated like almost $100 million over its lifetime, but before it crashed. But one of the things I learned from that was I thought, oh God, I really like the next thing I do. I really want to not have to raise a whole lot of money because there are pros and cons to raising money, but and there are reasons to do it and there are reasons not to do it. But this time I thought I'd rather see if I could bootstrap something from nothing. And I kind of I'm sorry, go on.
I was going to say that's kind of the funnest thing to do as an entrepreneur, right? And that's a good lead into that $500 startup, which is what we're going to talk about a lot today. But before we do that, you mentioned you were a journalist, and I have to talk about this because I used to be a TV journalist myself. Typical one-man band. I did it in Idaho and Wisconsin before I ditched that for some of the same reasons you'd mentioned. So my question on this though is like, what did being a journalist transfer for you into your entrepreneurships?
Oh, nobody's ever asked me that question, but that's a really excellent question. A lot of different things. One, when you're a journalist, you sort of have no fear of calling people up and talking to them and learning because you do that as a journalist. Like back when I was writing about stuff, you could actually call up Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and they'd actually pick up the call. And so you kind of get this sort of fearless thing. And which is really important when you're an entrepreneur. You have to be willing to reach out to people and learn and be very open. So that was one thing I learned. The other thing I always loved about being a journalist, it was just really fun, was that you got sort of immediate feedback from your quote unquote audience. And so I love that, like getting letters or emails or whatever. And in the case of doing things on Amazon, your feedback comes mostly in terms of sales. So that kind of feedback loop I always loved in journalism, but I really love it also in the Amazon world. I can see, what people think of what I'm selling simply by just looking at the sales numbers.
That last comment really resonates with me. I'm definitely the guy with a short attention span and do it now or do it never kind of guy. Yeah. And with the immediate feedback in e-commerce, it's like, well, you launch your campaign and you either get a couple thousand sales of those units go right through, or you fall flat and have to figure everything out. So that feedback loop is pretty short. I love that. So you actually you've actually like talked to Bill Gates and Steve Jobs on the phone then, or?
I did many times. Remember, I did it in the 80s and the 90s. So the industry was quite different and it was much earlier stage. So
still that's some prime history right there. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, they were both interesting guys back then. But I would write about Apple and America Online and Microsoft and all the companies of that period of time.
Did you ever talk to the You've Got Mail guy? I heard he ended up being an Uber driver a few years ago.
I actually talked to Steve Case many times, but I
That's
never
awesome.
talked to that guy. And although I do remember his story really well, I think he was like the sister or brother of somebody who worked at AOL, and he did the voice. He did the "You Got Mail" voice, and I think they paid him like $100 for it. And he in hindsight, he always thinks, oh my God, if I got like a penny or two royalty on everything, he would have been a billionaire.
Even if it was just in that one movie that had the You've Got Mail in it, whatever it was.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your journalism background is way larger than mine, and you've been able to go way farther with it. I only did it for a couple of years. I mean, I talked to like Don Wells and Fonzie, and it was fun, but nothing to compare. All right, cool. So I just had to nerd out with you a little bit on the journalism stuff. Not every day you get to do that, you know, when I jumped out of that industry, I loved being in the news. I loved being a reporter, but I hated working in the news industry because it was just so collapsed. And, you know, the TV station I was working up in Idaho Falls, it just like went under the week I left.
When I was doing it, I was making really very good money. You know, I was making like 6-figure income as a journalist. But remember, when the internet came along, the economics of reporting were much
totally
different.
collapsed. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you couldn't necessarily, and I, you know, when I worked for Business Week, for example, you know, I was making a nice 6-figure salary, and I had to produce maybe one or two stories a month, and that's it. Now you could never get away with that today.
Yeah, it's like 1 or 2 stories an hour nowadays.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
What have you tweeted today? Yeah, well, that's lots of fun. All right, so let's go back to your journey here as you're journeying through Amazon to get into that market, and you've written this book, The $500 Startup. So walk me through how you made this startup and why you decided to do it bootstrap style.
Right. So I, you know, basically, as I told you in my last startup, which raised lots of venture capital money. You know, that didn't end up as well as I would have liked. And I really just wanted to do bootstrap something. And I kind of just really went on the internet and start researching things. And one of the things
as a journalist would, right? Or as a serial entrepreneur would, which is both.
Exactly. It was that skill of research that it's the same thing as reporting a story, right? You just go and figure it out. You do your research, you call people, you research on the internet. That's what you do, right? So that's what I did. And in the book, which is called The $500 Startup on Amazon, I basically, you know, said I have something that I refer to. I call it the genius to idiot cycle. And what I mean by that is, you know, you kind of do your research, and then you think of a great idea, and you think you're just a genius. And then you research it some more, and you realize it was just the dumbest thing ever. And you kind of go through this genius to idiot cycle, which is like a sine wave up and down, until you eventually figure out something that makes sense.
So did Ask Jeeves help you figure this one out, or which search engine were they using when you started this process?
Oh no, this is Google. This is
I know, but I had to throw that one in.
Yeah, I'm not that old, but anyway,
Yahoo.
So I kind of went through the genius to idiot cycle, and I, you know, I came up with one idea called Tech Score, and that was this idea where I was going to rate the cell phone strength at every house in America. And it was going to be a service that I would sort of sell to like Zillow and other real estate companies. And I thought it sounded really cool. Sounded like and I spent a bunch of money, like way too much money on it, like 25. Yeah. Yeah.
We just spoke to Verizon Wireless earlier this week and interviewed Wes Pomeroy, which is the director at the merchandising side of the digital side of Verizon. And I'm a Verizon customer, but AT&T can't get it at my house. So your product concept actually might've resonated. So you raised $25,000.
Well, no, I just did. That was all my money. I just spent $25,000 trying to build this thing until I realized it was just really hard to sell to, you know, the people I thought would want to buy it. And eventually just said, you know, this is not going to work. And so that was another. So I thought of all sorts of other bad ideas along the way and tested a few out. And eventually I kind of hit upon the Amazon private label model. And this was back in 2015.
Did you jump straight into private label, or did you try retail arbitrage or reverse wholesale before
I
you did private label?
researched them all, but it seemed pretty clear. And I actually tried out the liquidation model a little bit. And I talk about some of this in the book. And I researched the retail arbitrage thing. And basically what I concluded pretty quickly, retail arbitrage just wasn't for me. And I actually talk about this a lot in the $500 startup, because I interviewed a couple of people who are in the retail arbitrage business, and you can make good money at it, but the cost in terms of like being a road warrior sounded really awful. So the idea of, I basically say in the book, hey, this can work for a lot of people. It's just not for me.
What do you mean? You didn't want to go around buying up all the hand sanitizer, throw it in a
Exactly.
and all of a sudden Amazon suspends you? That model doesn't look attractive to you, Mark? Come on.
Well, I didn't want to diss it completely, because I know there are people who make a living at it.
There absolutely are, but it's fun to shiv and jab a little bit here and there.
Yeah, no, I get your point. But yeah, so I kind of looked into retail arbitrage. I even looked into the liquidation model, where I actually bought a pallet of used those little drones, helicopter things, off of liquidation.com, and then tried to relist them on Amazon. And I actually made a bunch of money on it, which was great. It was a good return on investment. But again, I kind of decided that's not for me, because I thought, I don't want to be schlepping pallets around and hiring warehouse workers and all the stuff that goes into that.
And there is a lot of stuff that goes into that. Amazon is not passive income by any stretch. I usually have that phrase in every single podcast, by the way, because I like to hit it home. Sometimes it feels a lot like it's us against Amazon.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about, you've already volunteered quite a few of your missteps or failures, but when it came to starting your private label piece, this is the part that most people are going to care about. What was the biggest mistake that you thought you made that maybe others could learn from?
Don't follow your gut. Follow the data is sort of one of my big lessons. And I talk about this a lot in the book, which is, you have to kind of look at things in a fairly cold-hearted way, right? So my first product was darts. Right, that was my first product, and I didn't know. I have no interest in the game. I've never played the game, but I looked at the data, and the data told me this could be a really good market. And I kind of dug into it, and I figured it all out, and I created a dart product, and it's done really, really well over the years. But in answer to your question, one of the biggest lessons I have is you have to sort of separate your ego from data, right? Data really tells you what's really going on. And if you follow the data, you're probably going to be pretty successful. Because the only times I really screwed up products is when I thought I had a great idea that I had to do. And, but the data didn't necessarily support that. And those are the examples where I failed.
So there's, in my opinion, there's two types of products. There is a CoOp demand product, and then there's a demand generation product. So the Me Too products are really easy to replicate. The data is very obvious. Then there's the demand generation product, where you're gonna solve a problem people don't know they have. A cell phone service at your house type of product, potentially. Right. And so have you cracked the code on generating a new product yet, or are you still more of the Me Too product but maybe tweak it a little bit kind of angle?
I'm more of the Me Too and make it better. So my formula is relatively straightforward. I'm looking for long tail niches. I love bizarre little niches, right? That's I'm not interested in selling something that's really super mainstream, because you're taking the risk that Amazon's going to basically want to copy you. And you're going to face a ton of competition. So I always joke, I love finding things like spatulas, or things that are really kind of a little off the wall, which is great, because that's a competitive thing. Then I look for things with a certain amount of demand, where I think I can actually rank for the product, because there's not necessarily too much competition. I read reviews, because reviews are great to tell you what people like. and what people really don't like. And the ones where people are complaining are the best, right? Because they tell you what you need to fix.
I love that model too. I think that's a great best practice. This question just hit me, and I don't know if this is one you can speak to or not. So feel free to let me know either way. But do you know how to sell high quality goods on Amazon? I find it difficult to go higher price point and position things that maybe are higher quality. So you mentioned spatulas, which is what prompted this question. So like I would personally pay for a $50 spatula if it wouldn't melt when I hit the pan. It was the higher quality silicone, that kind of thing. But trying to hawk those on Amazon, tough beans, right? Like just tough. So do you feel like you can speak to that question, how to sell high quality goods on Amazon?
Well, the answer is yes and no. I mean, every situation's a little bit different. Something like a high quality spatula, I could see that would be hard to do because you can't visually communicate that easily, in terms of like the type of material you use, or maybe you could. If you could, for me, the most important thing is you got to be able to visually communicate kind of the efficacy of the product, and not just talk about it in the text. So a high quality spatula could be hard to communicate visually, potentially. On the other hand, if I looked at spatulas and then I saw like, oh, wait a sec, there's low price spatulas, there's medium price spatulas, but there's not a really expensive spatula in the market. So maybe that would, if I saw that, I might say, maybe there is room in the market. And a good example of that kind of thinking, and I mentioned in the book, there was this woman I remember I read an article about a few years ago who had basically got into the pillbox category. Okay. And the reason she got into pillboxes was because all she saw were those cheap plastic ones that said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on the pillbox. But she didn't see any pillboxes that were really high end, like the kind of thing you might buy at Tiffany's. And so she jumped into the pillbox market at the high end, like really expensive, like beautiful pillboxes, and she's done great. So that's an example of where there could be an opportunity sometimes in the high end of a market if it hasn't been grabbed by somebody else, which was the case in the pillbox lady.
I think that's a great point. One of my failed projects was chef knives. I went to China. I talked to an actual forge, and it was an end-to-end single metal sheath forged, and it was a wood handle. And I thought they were great knives. I thought they were fantastic. Yep. But the data would have said otherwise probably. And I went against the gut, or I went with the gut against the data rather. And I could barely sell like 3 of those things. It was bizarre.
Well, my example of that, and I talk about this in the book as well, is I did darts, and kind of a jar of darts as my first product. And it did great. It just kicked ass. It was the best product, right? And then I was like feeling like pretty studly about that.
You have an entire brand on darts, right?
Yeah. So I said, okay, well, if people love my darts in a jar, how about if I offer them dart accessories in a jar? And how about that, right? That was the extent of my thinking, right? And I think I was kind of full of myself, right? Because I had done really well in the first one. Well,
what did you do? Go order 5,000 of these things?
I didn't order. Well, thankfully, I didn't offer 5,000, but I did order like 1,000 or 1,500 or something like that. And guess what? People didn't necessarily want that.
Just wanted darts.
They just wanted the darts, and I got rid of them at cost, and so it wasn't such a terrible failure. But it taught me the lesson: stick to the data, not my feelings.
So tell me how you feel about this statement. For every 3 products that you launch, 1 is going to do exceptional, 1's going to break even, sell at cost, and the 3rd's going to lose money. Even this ratio, in my opinion, happens to experts as well as the beginners, and you try and sway one way or another, but you still kind of fall into that ratio. What are your thoughts on that? Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. You're going to have winners and losers. It just kind of comes with the territory. It's just the way it is. And I actually talk about my losers in the book. Like I had one product that was a diaper caddy, the little things that new moms get to carry rent diapers and wipes and things of that nature.
You look like you've had lots of children and can speak.
Got 3.
I got 3 kids under 5. So
yeah. So I understand. But anyway, so I did diaper caddy, and we read the reviews, and I thought, oh, people want a diaper caddy with more pockets on it. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm gonna have a diaper caddy with more pockets on it, and I'm gonna make it. Actually, it was gray. The color was gray because gray was a really good color for most nurseries because it kind of goes into the colors. It blends into the color scheme.
I think my wife decorates with gray more than any other color, so I think you got that one right.
Yeah, well, it got awesome reviews. Like we were kicking, people loved it. It was doing really well for a while, and then, here's the problem. Eventually, the market for diaper caddies just got
flooded.
Saturated.
Yep.
And the price point just started going down. Now I was still making money on them, but you sort of have this ROI problem, which is it really worth me investing more into diaper caddies when I'm making only a few bucks per caddy? Wouldn't that cash be better used on something with a higher margin? So eventually, even though it got awesome reviews and got off to a really strong start, eventually we said, we should apply our resources in an area that, where there's a better return on investment.
So because you've had so many of these product launch experiences, I think this next question you'll be able to speak in great detail about. There's a product lifecycle on Amazon. You've just kind of defined it right there, right? And it feels like to me that the product lifecycle on Amazon is getting shorter, getting tighter. And people are you launch a product and it's got a 2 or 3 year shelf life and it's getting down to 2 years or a year and a half because the market gets flooded. What are your thoughts on the product life cycle, and should you always be launching products?
Well, that's my strategy. I have 5, 6, 7 products now, and I do that because it's like my Amazon mutual fund, right? I'm spreading
I love that.
I'm spreading my risk out, and some products are going to do well endlessly, others are going to kind of flail out for some reason. So I'm actually working on a product launch right now, and I think it'll do fine. But the real idea is that I'm spreading my risk by having a lot of different products, and because they're all going to go up and down over time.
Well, I think it's interesting to see how the marketplace is changing. In the last 60, 90 days, we've seen Amazon really make it more difficult to sell on the platform.
Yep.
Kind of feels like it's entering the maturity phase to me, where it requires more sophistication. So what are your thoughts on that, and where are you going with your business to maybe solve for that?
Well, I mean, I'm still rolling out products, and because I think it's risk diversification, and there's the number of niches one can go into is pretty much endless, which is why it's a great opportunity still. On the other hand, I think the level of sophistication that's required to really compete is certainly going up, and that's why you're sort of seeing this market of companies that are coming into the market that are basically buying up these nascent Amazon brands, because I think the brand owners are recognizing that they have to up their game a lot, or they have to plow a lot more money in to be competitive. And so as a result of that, many of these sellers now want to sell. And now there's a pretty vibrant market of companies that are buying them up. And I'm actually starting one of them now, called Sorfia. And so basically that's how I'm going to expand, is I'm not only going to create new products still, but I'm also going to start buying up other Amazon brands where it makes sense.
So that's a big strategy shift. Walk me through why you decided to start shifting that direction.
Well, I think I recognize a challenge I have, as well as a challenge other sellers have. And typically what I've seen is a lot of sellers kind of get to what I call like the $500,000 level, meaning $500,000 in revenue, in annual revenue. And then they sort of face a choice. And they go, okay, this is going great. I'm making some good money, making a nice 6-figure income. And then they go, but if I really want to grow this to the next level, I need to invest. So you sort of face this dilemma, which is you either have to take money from investors to grow, or you take on debt, which has pros and cons associated with it. And a lot of people don't want to do that, right? Because these are lifestyle businesses often. And so that leads a lot of people, whether it be me or other smaller sellers, to say, maybe it's time for me to go, cash out and basically sell it to a company that is going to apply the resources to grow this brand. So
I would totally agree with everything you just mentioned. I think a lot of sellers are a little burned out with the rules changing on Amazon. You know, today it's pesticides and everything going on with that. And one of my one of my children under 5 is deciding to say hello. This is Hunter. He's my 5-year-old. I'm going to bribe him with some candy and
Hi,
send
Hunter.
take the whole thing, bud. All right, so we've got this market that's maturing, and it's harder than ever to sell on the platform, but it's also still rewarding. And obviously it's rewarding enough that you're going to go out and buy some Amazon businesses to scale. What do you think? Tell me a little bit about that strategy shift, though, in the sense that you have to have a team or a higher level of sophistication. So like, walk me through how your business model is going to have to adapt to this.
Are you talking about the roll-up model or
the roll-up model?
Well, I think in that particular case, we have certain criteria that we're looking for. We want, obviously we want things that can be well optimized. So we're in some ways we look at a brand and we say, okay, these guys have done a really good job, and they should be proud of what they've accomplished so far. But we see opportunities where we can basically improve it. Now, there are lots of levels of improvement one can talk about, right? There's what I call the easy layup improvements, which are things like just optimizing a page, right? That includes photographs and copy and all the stuff that goes into that. And so, if they haven't necessarily done a great job, well, there's kind of an easy layup on optimization right there. But there's other forms of optimization as well, like there's supply chain optimization, there's advertising optimization, there's expanding outside the Amazon ecosystem, all those kind of things. So we look for things where there's an opportunity, really not just to take a brand, but really double, triple, quadruple, or more the revenue.
So are you going to have, are you going to build like a team and like have one person in charge of advertising across all these accounts and one designer? Is that kind of the model you're heading towards?
Well, I think certainly for some parts of that we'll do internally, and some parts we'll outsource to others. So that's the idea.
Got it. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's really interesting to see, because I think there's a lot of businesses such as yourself that are heading down that path as Amazon enters its maturity phase and raises the bar, so to speak. And I think you nailed it right there. All right. So you've talked about a few products that you've done. Have you talked about your craziest product yet?
Oh, well, I'll tell you about the craziest product that I actually didn't do.
Okay.
Which is sort of funny because I'm always looking for great niches, right? And, I'm always kind of researching and picking things apart. And some time ago, it was a couple of years ago, I was looking around and I looked at the sex toys category.
Oh boy.
And I was like, wow, I was just fascinated by it because I could see all the numbers and I was like, this is amazing, amazing space. Now, and then I kind of mined into the various niches of sex toys. And the one that really jumped out at me at the time was dildos. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, look at that. And the competition in that space didn't seem to be, too bad, right? I was sort of surprised, but the demand was really quite substantial. And I thought, wow, the margins on these things must be awesome because after all, they're just rubber and silicone, right? And they're selling for like quite a lot of money, these things. And I got all excited because I thought, oh, this is an awesome opportunity. So I did all the research. And I told my mother about it. My mother is 85 years old.
Oh boy,
she was fascinated. She was totally fascinated by this. And she was asking me a million questions about it all. And I
please do not repeat these questions.
I won't. But they were all sorts of questions about, well, size. They were asking me questions about size and color and all this kind of stuff, right? And I got really into it. And then my wife and I work on our business together. So I sort of brought all my research to her. And as you might imagine, she said, no way you're selling that. And I decided that, not so much because of business reasons, but for the reason of marital harmony, I decided maybe I'll skip that opportunity. But I was fascinated.
Good call. Happy wife, happy house. So
that's exactly right. So, but I talk about that in the book where there are things that for a lot of different reasons, you may not want to go forward with.
So you've gone, just to kind of cusp your journey here. So you started selling on Amazon in 2015. launched all of these crazy products and chose not to launch some other crazy products. Today, you're approaching 7 figures. So tell me, how does that make you feel to have been on that journey? Do you feel differently today than you did 5 years ago?
I feel pretty good about it so far. I think it's not without risk, and I certainly feel the risk that a lot of sellers face. I've had products suppressed and things like that, so it makes me a little nervous sometimes as you grow. But I also I love the business because I have, in part because of the lifestyle flexibility it affords me. I have 3 kids who are at home, and I'm able to spend time with them. So I love that flexibility that an Amazon business gives you. Now, I don't love all the stress that's associated with being just on the Amazon platform, which is why we're diversifying now. But for the most part, I think it's been a really great journey.
So what piece of advice would you give somebody who's going from the $500,000 mark to hit the next threshold? You kind of alluded to there's going to be some financing involved, but what kind of mentality shift would you say too?
I think it's a very personal question because it's a risk reward question. You sort of have to and everybody evaluates risk and reward kind of differently. So, if you feel comfortable with certain levels of risk, I think it's great if you want to grow a brand from 500,000 to 5 million, right? But you're then going to have to, take on more debt, or you're going to have to find investors, or you may want to do it slowly and grow from cash flow. So there's a lot of options, and kind of what options you choose really are very much driven by, what kind of risk profile you have, and different people are going to answer that question differently.
Is the answer to that question the same going from 6 figures to 7? Or is there a difference between that mentality when you go from?
I think it's pretty similar.
Okay.
I mean, I think a lot of the reasons you see a lot of sellers wanting to sell now is because they don't necessarily want to take those risks that are associated with investing more capital, either through debt or equity, into their business. So I think the market there are a lot of sellers on the market looking to sell, not so much because their businesses are bad. Their businesses are often quite good and in many ways growing. I think they worry about needing to invest more money into the business, so that's anyway.
Got it. All right. So last Amazon question for you. Is there any piece of advice that you haven't given that somebody could go take action today on to grow their business?
Well, I think the best piece of advice is it's still a great market. There's lots of opportunity in the market for sure. I think I'd start small and focus on real interesting niches where you can add real value. And that's one of the things I'm always looking for. And I'm always researching little niches where I think I can add value, or you want to do something a little differently. One of the things I looked into a while ago is I was looking for products on Amazon that were where the patent was going to expire or had expired. And that was sort of my one of my strategies that I kind of pursued for a while, where I was researching products where they were going to fall off patent, and I could offer a competing product at a lower price because the patent had just expired. So you want to do things that are just a little different from what everybody else is doing. If you just want to do a Me Too product, then I think you could have a challenge.
Me Too plus, I guess, might be the way to put it. I think those are wise words, Mark. All right. So last question for you today. Outside of growing businesses and being an entrepreneur, do you have any passions that get you up in the morning that you like to do?
Oh, I think, perhaps it's because of the stress associated with business. I love exercising, so I just get in fact, kind of one of my religious things, I'll get up at, 6:30, 7 in the morning. And the first thing I do is just either do my calisthenics or I go running or whatever. And it really puts me in the mindset that I think you need in order to run a business. Clears your head out, and it just gets you in the right frame of mind to do well, either on Amazon or in other business ventures.
2020 might be the hardest year to exercise of all time because you have to do it alone, or so to speak. I can't go to the gym necessarily as confidently. Well, cool. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the My Amazon Guy podcast. We really appreciate it. I think you've given us an interesting story and some great advice today.
So don't forget, my book is, of course, on Amazon.
We got to plug the book. We totally got to plug the book. All right. So the $500 startup on Amazon, we're going to have a link in the description of the podcast. Any plug you want to give that real quick, Mark?
Oh, well, it's new. It just came out on Amazon. So it's available in ebook, audiobook, and paperback.
Perfect. I'm glad we did that pitch because that's definitely a book that I would find fascinating, interesting. I'm going to be picking up and reading it. And Mark, it was great talking with you today, and wish you the best.
I appreciate your time.
All right. That's the My Amazon Guy podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. This was the My Amazon Guy podcast with Stephen Pope. Each episode helps you grow your sales on Amazon through ideas on traffic and conversion rate improvements. Hit that subscribe button right now to tune in each week. And if you need more help, go to myamazonguy.com.